Hey, I'm Miro Joe, and I want to show you some rules that apply to structural perspective. And I don't want you to be scared when I say rules, because I want you to think of rules as something that will give you control over your work, not something you have to do. A rule like, if this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. See, that's a rule that you can use because it gives you the ability to predict and to plan. So let me show you some rules that apply to structural perspective. Okay, so to begin, you can see that I've drawn the same markers that I did in my other video, landscape perspective. And I'm going to use those as I progress in my drawing. But what I need is a starting point, something to build all of my buildings on top of, because I want to paint something like a small downtown corner scene. And so an easy way to start that is to first decide where my streets and sidewalks will be so that I have some lines to make the buildings parallel and appropriate according to. Okay, now this is a basic straight road, but that's kind of boring. I think I want to make it curve a little bit. Wait, I just made a mistake. Look, if this road up here is parallel and going the exact same direction as this road, let's say they're both pointing exactly north. Well, all of these lines, if they're parallel, should vanish to the exact same point. All parallel lines vanish to the same vanishing point. So I need to fix this because I do want my road to continue on the same course that it was. So from this point that I first established, I'll bring it down. I'll curve it. I'll bring it down. And I'll bring it down to this same width at this height in the picture. So I'm going to come out here. And then I'm going to curve it. Now my perspective is more appropriate for a road that continues on the same course to the vanishing point. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is an intersecting road. And let's say that this road is intersecting it at 90 degrees. And so that angle really could be anything in between 90 degrees and 0 degrees, depending on how high off of the ground you are. So I'm just going to make it what I think looks all right. Just estimate it visually. So over here, I'll make this bending and we'll make a road coming this way. Like this will be the curb. And I want to make sure that my lines continue on the right course. So let's make it like this. Maybe follow through so that I can keep my line consistent. And if you get like this on a painting, if you look down the edge, you can really see if a line is straight a lot better than if you're looking straight at it. You know, I can kind of close one eye and drag it along this course. And I can keep the line a lot more straight this way, even though it's real jagged. I do that a lot of times in bigger murals. Darken this guy. Now the width to make this. I have this line established. Let's carry this off the picture. How wide to make it this way? I know that it needs to be skinnier this way than it is this way if I want these to be anywhere near equal proportions. But the truth is, I don't really care how accurate it is. So I'm just going to make it a little bit skinnier. So we'll take this, and as this line comes up, I'm going to make it get slightly closer to this one, as if it has a vanishing point that's far away. I'm thinking this road could stand to be a little bit wider, just because of the look of it. So an important thing that I have to be mindful of as I'm establishing what I want to be a square block is that I need to make the vanishing points of this road and this road far enough apart that where they meet is greater than a 90-degree angle, because the only time I would ever see a 90-degree corner on a square is if I'm looking straight down at it or straight up at it. Like if it was the top of a skyscraper, I'd look straight up and see that 90 degree or the curb that I'm standing right on. I'd look down and see 90 degrees. But in all other scenarios, it's going to be greater than 90 degrees. And if I put it all the way at 90, then I'm going to have a lot of distortion in my picture, such as what you see in those wide angle photographs that have the fisheye effect on them. So you might not want that in your painting. So I'm just saying, make the vanishing points far enough apart that where they meet at the edges of your picture are still greater than a 90-degree angle, and it'll just make it look more natural. Okay, now it's time for the fun part. I'm going to start drawing a building. So let's put a corner of a building right here. Now, I want to make the edges, I want to make this a square building. And so I have to remember that all parallel lines vanish to the same point. Not some, not sometimes, all, always, all parallel lines, same point every time. I see so many pictures that the main problem with the perspective is just that very simple thing, that there's lines that would be parallel not vanishing to the same point. This building is going to have a wall that's parallel to this sidewalk, and all of those lines that are parallel are going to run to this point. So let's do one at the base. Now this, I don't have the vanishing point in view, so I'm just estimating it. About the same amount that I shrunk the sidewalk. I'll just try to shrink the same percentage. I just want to try to keep it looking consistent, like these would be vanishing to the same point, even though it's much further away and off the picture. I want to show you a good technique for deciding how wide to make one wall versus how wide to make the other if you have in your mind a certain kind of building. Maybe you know you want to make it a rectangle, or maybe you know you want to make it look like a square. Let me show you a technique for getting that to look like you want it to. Draw the whole scene from a bird's eye view. Let's say that you have your building right here, a rectangle, and maybe you're standing right here. And so you can see that if I'm looking this way at the corner of the building, that I'm going to see this at an angle. And this is the street. This is the intersecting street here. So you see, this is all just approximating what's going on. But what I can see from that is that if I draw straight lines from the corners to where my eyes are, that I have a distance wide compared to another distance wide. And if I want to create this scenario in perspective, I now know that I copy these proportions to what I previously drew. So let's do that. That looked like it was about 1/3 of the left side. So the left side was maybe right here. And then about 1/3 of that width might be this far, and so then I make it like this. And I just drew that same scenario that I drew on the bird's eye view. And so then I have a much better estimation of my scene than if I were to just guess. So I think I'm going to make the far edge of this building about here. So we'll put this here. Now when I'm drawing perspective, I'm not worrying about how long or how short to make lines. It's okay if they overlap, because actually that helps me to see exactly where they intersect if I just run them all the way through. Like if I take this line and I just keep drawing it through all the way to the vanishing point, and I keep drawing this one all the way through, then I have an intersection. And that's easier to identify where a point is to get it by intersecting lines than just eyeballing it. So now up here would be the top of the building. I'll draw a line coming down to this point, like this. So that'll be the top of my building. Just a very basic square building so far, but I can add other things to it. And then here, I'm again estimating where these would vanish to the same point. So if these are, and the point would be at where you think this line would meet the horizon. That is where the vanishing point is. So where this line intersects with this line. So I'm going to try to point to that spot with this. So I'm going to guess it to be about that far. You know what? I'm going to make this line come down just a little more, because I'm seeing that this angle looks like it's coming in a little sharper than this, and it should be opposite. Since this one's higher from the horizon, it should be cutting down sharper than this one is cutting up if they're vanishing at the same point. So I'm going to correct that. So in my video landscape perspective, we learned the rule of halves and doubles. And that is that if I have a plane, let's say this is a sidewalk, and this is the horizon, if I cut the distance in half to the horizon from any point on this plane, so let's say from this point, or from this point. We cut it in half. Then the distance is now double here what it was down here at this point. And that also means that if I have an object, it's going to be half the size when it gets up to this point. So then that means it's going to be half of the height and half of the width. And you can see that this box is the size of one of these quarters, which is half of the width and half of the height of this big box. So that means that this is the same object as this object at double the distance. Now, while that rule of halves and doubles is true for the height and the width of the object, it is not true for the depth of the object, such as what we would see on the edges of buildings. So we have a different rule to learn. Let me show you why it's different for the depth of the object. Okay, now I drew this vertical line parallel to this corner, identifying a segment of this building. I want this building to have this symmetrical face here. I want to make it the same on both sides. So on this, I want to make the same segment that I did here, but it's got to be smaller to make the perspective right. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to remember that this shrinks to this only slightly faster than this shrinks to this. So I can use this rate of decrease to approximate this rate of decrease. If this shrinks by a certain percentage, shrink this way just a little bit more. So to put this in simple layman's terms, the longer the wall is, the closer it is to shrinking at the same rate as its height. But the shorter the wall is, the closer it will be to shrinking at 1.5 times the rate that the height shrinks. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is maybe make the middle of this building recessed a little. So I'll make another line right here. So now I need to connect these. So I'm going to take this. This line would be parallel to all of the other walls that are facing this way. So I need to make sure that this line is going toward the same vanishing point that this line is, that this line is, that this line is, that this line is. I need to make sure, even with the short lines, that I'm trying to make them point to the same vanishing point. So roughly to there. I'm sure that it's off by some degree. Same thing on the bottom. I'm going to make it pointing a little more upward than that line that it's sitting on right there. And then when I have those lines, then I'm going to make another line parallel to these. By parallel, I mean pointing to the same vanishing point. I'll make some windows on this building. Let's put a couple windows on it. Maybe put one here, like this. And I'm going to remember that rule. You know, if I make a window, I'm going to make this line vanishing to the same point as this line. Make this line also vanishing to that same point, being conscious of that over there. And I'm going to try to make, even though it's a very small difference, I'm going to try to make this, how much this side got smaller. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense to you. It's very small stuff. You can just estimate where this window is. As long as you get lines to the same appropriate vanishing point, it'll do wonders for the picture. All right, then let's do another one over here. I want to make sure that here's the vanishing point, so I want to make that window on that same line. Make it about right here. Bottom of the window pointing to the vanishing point. Something a little above that because I made my line crooked. So we'll make it come down here. Make it come right there. Make sure that this portion is skinnier than this portion. Make sure this portion is skinnier than this portion. I'm going to draw like a disc right here. Maybe I'll make it about right here. And the way I know what shape to make this disc is by about the same proportions at a square that a square would be seen up here. Like if this were a square in perspective, you can see it's squished. So if I'm making a circle, I want to make it the same. So I'll make it about like this. And now, if I take the corner and I make parallel lines vanishing to the same points as these, go like this, and then I go like this, vanishing to the same points. You can see now that I have the outline for a round object protruding off of this building, like this. So now I've got this round overhang above this window. I totally made that line wrong because it's not in sync with that window, so I'm going to have to fix that a little bit. But then I make these lines going up. And this is how you can add portions onto a building. Let's do the same thing over here. Let's make it coming up. This is where it's going to, I have it just over this window. I'll make it coming just past the window. And it's going to come off right here. It's going to be a disc shape like this. Now the thing about circles, about discs and perspective is no matter where they are, they're always symmetrical. They don't distort like squares or rectangles do, because they're the same on all sides. So I just cut off the part that I don't want. So boom, we just cut it off right there. Maybe it's coming down here, like that. Then we'll bring these edges up like this. Then maybe this is kind of a castle-shaped part of the building up here. We'll put a cone-shaped roof on it, like this. But you can't see that up on this one, right here. And you know what I think I'll do is, I think that I'll make on this now flat edges so that it's like maybe an octagon. So if I just make lines along that curved line here that are vanishing to the same point as this, so up here, I'm going to make a straight line vanishing to the same point. Right here, straight line vanishing to the same point. Okay, and then right here, I'll make a straight line vanishing to the same point as this one. And then I'll make a straight line here. Then I can connect these, and I can make this. And then try to make an average in between them. That's something that I'm just going to have to eyeball. So make these lines straight, make that straight. All right, I'll do the same thing on this one. Now I think it needs maybe another window here. I just thought maybe that would be a little more aesthetically pleasing. I'm trying to design a building here. Okay, then maybe it needs some overhangs. Let's do some overhangs. Top of the overhang, I'm going to make sure that it's above the horizon because this would typically be at eye level. So we don't want to be banging our foreheads on the awning. So let's put it above eye level. Let's put it maybe right here. Like that. Start with maybe just a rectangle. Again, I'm conscious of this vanishing to the same point as all the other lines that it would be parallel to. And then it's going to slant down like this. I'll make the top of the awning, remembering to make it kind of in between these lines. Here, here. Gradually getting straighter as they come down to the horizon. Like this. Go like this, and then make it straight down here. This one is almost perfectly straight, but it's bending down just a little bit. It's so close to the horizon, like that. And then maybe I can make some columns coming down on this awning. So let's set those just inside of that. Come straight down, like this. And then maybe those are set in some concrete blocks. So I'll make top of a square right here. You can see that I made this line parallel to this line. I made this line vanishing to the same point as this line. This one vanishing to the same point as this line. This one vanishing to the same point as this line. Always following those guidelines. But we don't want to make it on the sidewalk because I think that would be against building code. And then maybe I'll put a door on this building right under this awning. So just a straight line on top of that door. Well, that would be eye level. Let's put it above eye level. Okay, now I have these horizontal lines, putting these markers on this horizontal plane, but you know I also have these vertical lines. And you can have a vertical horizon just like I have this horizontal horizon. So let's put it right at this vanishing point. So this would be the vertical horizon of this plane that's on the side of this street. So then if I cut that distance in half and I take this corner to what I'm going to just eyeball as the halfway point, and let's put a building right here, and I'm just going to estimate the size because I really don't care if it's really exactly half the size. Let's just do this and then put it here. I know that this wall, if it is the same size, this wall, since it's on this plane, is going to be this, shrinking to this, slightly faster than this, is shrinking to this. While the entire size of this building would be 1/2 of the entire size of this building. So you see, I continue to use those principles just to judge if I'm keeping things in the right ballpark as I'm going along here. Okay, now as I'm filling in some background, I think I'm going to come up in here and make an intersecting road. So that road would be really skinny up here because of the same rule that we talked about. The same reason that I made this one real skinny as it bends. The further it gets, these roads are shrinking at that same rate. So I'm going to make it nice and skinny. So this right here will be a road intersecting this one right here. And then I might put some buildings on the other side of that at different sizes that are just running along the road instead of in perspective. So maybe these would just be some distant buildings. I'm not going to worry about a lot of details there. Hey, maybe there's a skyscraper in there. Like that, you know, who knows? Distant horizon. You don't have the same perspective on these distant lines. Now down here I want to explain something. You get a little bit of distortion toward the edge of pictures, and this is why it happens. All parallel lines have a vanishing point at both ends. So while there's a vanishing point to these parallel lines, behind me they have a different vanishing point, and they're disappearing that way. Now sometimes as you turn your head right and you turn your head left, or if you look straight, you can see a little bit of where they're starting to bend and go to the opposite vanishing point if they're parallel lines. That's why oftentimes in photographs you see that fisheye effect where straight lines are bent. And that's what's happening on this corner here. I want to put a building coming down on this corner, but it's starting to look like that's not a square corner. So in order to correct that, if I wanted to, I would just distort it a little bit. And I would just bend this up like this as it's starting to go toward an opposite vanishing point right there. And then I would just make my building appropriately. Sometimes I do this in larger murals where it matters. Other times I just leave the distortion because I don't care. You do have some degree of distortion in your own natural vision, but your eyes are just really good at correcting it and understanding your moving perspective. So for the same reason that I'm kind of tweaking this and starting to bend it, I'm going to do the same thing up here, because it's just that transition where the parallel lines are starting to go toward the opposite vanishing point on the opposite side of those parallel lines, just barely coming into the field of view. It all just depends if that transition is actually in your field of view or not. If this was zoomed way in, it wouldn't be in the field of view, but because it's a wide angle, where it's starting to turn toward the opposite vanishing point, actually is starting to be in the view. So up here I'll have the same kind of curve where it's no longer going toward the same vanishing point right here. And I'll start making this more level at the top of this building. Okay, so I'm going to call my painting finished now. Now, I want to point out something, that this painting looks ideal from about where I'm standing because I'm looking up a little bit at the top of this building, which would make me see the underside of these objects. If I were to back away, say here, then I would see less of the underside of those objects. But since a flat painting doesn't change, that means that there's one distance from this that's an ideal viewing point. That distance would change depending on how far apart I made those vanishing points, which would determine how sharp all these angles would be. But that's really up to your judgment. We've all seen photos that look fish-eyed and distorted. It's up to you how you want to make it and how extreme you want to make that perspective. Now, I know that I have given you a ton of information, but if you just remember one little bit of information, that's more than you had before that. And so my learning process has always been this, that I paint a picture as good as I know how, and I don't worry about all of the things that I don't know how to do yet. I find one thing that I can improve. Don't overwhelm yourself trying to do this whole thing all at once. I find one thing that I can improve, and I study it. I've spent a huge part of my life studying all of the things that I've shown you. And so hopefully I can help you with your learning process and give you information that you can use to identify how to improve that one thing that you're working on. So don't get overwhelmed. And approximating is fantastic. I do it all the time. So enjoy your painting, and we'll see you on the next video.